The estate road was the kind of road that existed because the estate required it rather than because the road's existence produced the estate. The specific quality of the approach that was designed for the destination, rather than the destination being incidental to the road. He had been on estate roads before. The historical preservation work produced estate roads as the regular occurrence. The properties of significant age and continuous occupation that the preservation firm contracted for were the properties that had the specific history the firm's function required. And the specific history was concentrated in the estates rather than in the urban properties, because the urban properties had the specific attrition of urban development, and the estates had the specific continuity of maintained isolation. This estate road was different from the estate roads he had been on before in a quality he was noting without yet categorizing. The quality of a road that was very well maintained in the specific way of a road that was maintained for actual use, rather than for the appearance of maintenance. Most estate roads were maintained for the appearance. The estate roads whose properties were in the assessment category were frequently the roads of properties that had had the sustained attention of ownership that was serious about the property's continuity. This road had that quality, but more so, the more so being the quality he was noting without categorizing. He arrived at the estate on a wet November evening. The estate was the kind of building that the 18th century produced when the 18th century's significant resources were applied to the permanent statement. The stone construction that was neither the decorative gesture nor the practical shelter, but the specific third category of the building that intended to be exactly what it was for as long as it could be, which was the category that the historical preservation firm existed to address. He got out of the car. The estate's front door opened before he reached the steps. Two women stood in the doorway. He had read the pre-contract research, and the pre-contract research had provided the standard background documentation. The property's registered ownership, the estate's assessed history, the contact information through which the contract had been arranged. The registered owners were the Voss sisters, names given as Thessaly and Veen. No additional information provided for either beyond the names and the registration documents, which had produced in his pre-contract researched the specific gap that the standard documentation produced when the standard documentation had nothing further to add. He had noted the gap. He was noting it again. The women in the doorway were striking in the way that the pre-contract research had not prepared him for, and which the standard categories of appearance were not adequate to describe. They had the quality of people whose presence was dense, not the density of weight or volume, but the density of depth, the specific quality of a presence that had more behind it than the immediate surface suggested, the way that very old places had the quality of the accumulated time in their walls and surfaces. He was standing at the steps of a very old place. The women were part of the place. Thessaly, the taller of the two, dark-haired, with the quality of someone who was assessing the situation with a thoroughness that the casual observer would not have identified as assessment, said, "Mr. Duvall, please come in from the rain." Veen, younger in appearance by some years, lighter-haired, with the quality of someone who was in a more active version of the same thoroughness, said, "We've been expecting you." "The drive from the valley takes longer in November," he said. "Yes. The road's lower section had some weather. Thank you for the access." He went in. The estate's interior was the interior that the exterior had prepared him for and more. The preservation specialist's specific professional attention, the reading of a space's material history through its accumulated evidence, was producing, in the first 30 seconds of the interior, the reading of a space that had been in continuous significant occupation for the full duration of its existence, not the continuous occupation of a space that was lived in periodically or managed between uses. The occupation of a space that was lived in fully and consistently, whose every surface bore the evidence of the sustained human presence that the space had contained. The sustained human presence. He noted this in the professional register and continued the professional intake. They showed him to the guest rooms, the East Wing's secondary suite, which had the quality of the guest rooms that had been guest rooms for their full duration, rather than rooms converted to guest function from other uses. He deposited the equipment, and changed from the travel wet clothing, and came down to the main salon for the introductory conversation. The main salon had the fireplace and the furniture, and the specific quality of a room that had been the significant room of the estate for the estate's full duration. The room where the estate's occupants had been when they were being in the estate's primary social function. The room that had accumulated the 250 years of the being in it. He sat. The sisters sat across from him. They talked about the assessment, the parameters, the access, the documentation schedule, the specific rooms and features that the assessment would prioritize. He took notes with the professional quality of someone who was simultaneously conducting the intake and building the reading of the people across from him that the professional relationships beginning required. The reading was producing the same quality as the exterior roads maintenance had produced, the more so. Thessaly said, "You'll be staying for the full 3 weeks. The firm's contract specified the option of commuting, but the assessment documentation would benefit from the sustained presence." He said, "Yes. The thoroughness the assessment requires, the full architectural and material survey of a property this size and age, is better served by the sustained presence, 3 weeks of the on-site work." And he added it with the specific quality of the casual incidental detail, the register of the personal information that was relevant to the practical question and nothing more. "I'm single, so the 3 weeks away from home is straightforward. No complications." He said it and went back to the notes. Veen looked at Thessaly. Thessaly looked at Veen. He was looking at the notes. The look between the sisters had a specific quality that he did not observe at the moment of its occurrence, but that he would reconstruct later. The quality of two people who had been in each other's company for long enough that the significant exchange could occur in the specific compressed form of the look that contained the full conversation that two people who shared the long accumulated context could have in the duration of the glance. The introductory conversation continued. He finished the notes. He said, "I'll begin the assessment tomorrow at the first light. The exterior documentation first, then the structural interior." Thessaly said, "Yes. We're available for questions at any hour. We keep late hours. If you find yourself working in the evenings, we'll be present." He said, "Yes, thank you." He went back to the guest rooms. He lay in the old bed in the old room in the estate that had been in continuous significant occupation for 250 years, and he thought about the road's maintenance quality, and the women's presence quality, and the interior's accumulated occupation quality, and the look. He thought the look was significant. He went asleep. The assessment began at the first light. He worked with the quality of someone who was doing the function, and who found the function interesting. The specific compound quality that the historical preservation work required, which was the technical competency of the preservation specialist, and the genuine curiosity of the person who found the material history of significant places the most interesting category of thing. The estate was genuinely extraordinary. The exterior stonework of the 18th century's original construction was intact in ways that professional preservation work rarely encountered. Not intact in the sense of the maintained exterior. The exterior was maintained, but the specific quality of the maintenance was the quality of continuous care rather than periodic restoration. The stones had been cleaned and pointed on the ongoing basis, rather than the intervals that professional preservation practice typically addressed. The joinery was the original joinery. The window installations were the original window installations, not original in the restored or replicated sense, original in the sense of the actual original components in the original positions, which was the specific preservation achievement that the firm's 20-year history had encountered in 3 or 4 instances. He documented this. He documented it with the thoroughness that the significance required, and with the additional notation that the significance produced in the professional, who understood what the significance meant, the notation of the anomalous condition, the condition that exceeded the expected result of the standard preservation hypothesis, and which required the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis was in the noting. He was in the third day's interior documentation of the eastern wing's upper corridor when Thessaly appeared at the corridor's end, with the quality of someone who had been in the estate when he arrived, and who was always going to be at the corridor's end when the corridor required the being at. She said, "The eastern corridor's joinery dates to the original construction. You'll find the carpenter's mark on the interior of the window casements." He said, "I found it this morning." She said, "The mark is the mark of the workshop that constructed the estate's interior woodwork. The workshop was active from 1743 to approximately 1789. He said, "How do you know the workshop's dates?" She said, "Family records." He said, "Yes." He said it with the quality of someone noting the answer and noting also the quality of the answer, which was the quality of an answer that was accurate and insufficient simultaneously. Accurate in the sense of being technically correct, insufficient in the sense of describing the mechanism of the knowing without the mechanism's full form. He said, "The family records go back to the estate's construction." She said, "Yes." He said, "That's unusual. Most family records of this period don't survive in the usable form." She said, "We've been careful about the records." He said, "Yes. I see that." The evenings were the evenings of a mountain estate in November with the fire and the old furniture, and the sisters who kept late hours, and the historical preservation specialist, who was finding the estate more interesting than any property he had previously assessed. Veen asked him, on the fourth evening, about the current state of historical preservation practice. The specific questions of someone who had the prior knowledge to contextualize the current state rather than someone encountering the subject for the first time. The questions had the quality of the person who had been reading about something for a long time and who wanted the account of someone who was currently in it. He answered. He asked, in return, what her interest was, whether she had a background in the field or was approaching it from another direction. She said, "We've been watching the field from the outside for a considerable time. The preservation of the material record is a particular interest." He said, "Yes. I imagine it is, given the estate." She said, "Yes, given the estate." Thessaly asked him on the sixth evening about himself, not the professional self, the person. The questions were specific and genuinely curious, and had the quality that Veen's questions about the modern world had. The questions of someone who was interested in the subject from a perspective that was not the standard perspective. She asked, "What brought you to the preservation work? Not the career narrative, the actual thing." He said, "The material history. The idea that the physical object carries the record of the time it was in. That the stone has the information of the hand that placed it. That the wood has the information of the tree and the workshop and the application. The idea that the past is not the documentation's past but the object's past, and the object is available to the person who knows how to read it." She said, "The object as the primary source." He said, "Yes. The documentation is secondary. The documentation describes the object. The object is the thing." She said, "Yes." She said it with the quality of someone who had been in the thing the described person was describing from the inside and who was receiving the outside's description and finding the description accurate. He noticed the dinner table. The dinner table was set for 3. The food was prepared. The estate had a kitchen function that produced the meals with the quality of a kitchen that had been producing meals in the estate for a considerable period. The food was at the table. He ate. The sisters did not eat. They were present at the table, fully present, engaged in the conversation's full quality. They did not eat. He noted this. He did not ask. He noticed the mirrors. The estate's interior had no mirrors. The rooms that the 18th century's design would have placed mirrors in, the salon, the upper corridor, the dressing rooms, had the walls and the furniture and the art but not the mirrors. The mirror spaces were present in the design's logic. The mirrors were absent. He noted this. He did not ask. He noticed the quality of the light on their faces. He was a preservation specialist. He read surfaces professionally. The surface of a face in firelight was a surface he had the specific training and experience to read accurately. What the firelight produced on a face at the proximate distance, the reflective quality of the skin, the specific response of the face's surface to the light's angle and intensity, was part of the professional reading of an occupied space. What the firelight produced on Thessaly's face in the main salon's evening was not what it produced on a face whose surface was in the standard category. He noted this. He did not ask. On the 9th evening, Veen said, "The estate's west wing. The blocked access on the 2nd floor." He said, "Yes. I've documented the exterior and the ground floor. The access to the 2nd floor's intersection is blocked by the secondary staircase's closure. I've noted it in the assessment," she said. The secondary staircase was closed in 1891. The 2nd floor's intersection has not been accessed by anyone other than us since 1891. He said, "The assessment would benefit from the access." She said, "Yes. We'll open the staircase tomorrow." He said, "Thank you." She said, "The section contains the estate's original library and the full archive of the family records." He said, "Yes. I'd like to assess the library's condition and the archive's preservation state." She said, "Yes. The archive is extensive." He said, "I imagine it is." She said, "It is the record of the estate's full duration. The records are in the original form, the correspondence, the accounts, the documentation of the estate's operation in each of the periods." He said, "In the original form." She said, "Yes." He said, "That's an extraordinary preservation achievement." She said, "Yes, it is." He said it and she said it in the same register, the register of two people who were in the presence of the same thing and who were describing the same thing from positions that were not the same position. On the 14th evening, Thessaly said, "The assessment is at its midpoint." He said, "Yes. The interior documentation is complete through the main structure. The remaining week covers the West Wing's 2nd floor and the archive and the specific detailed assessment of the materials that the first 2 weeks have flagged as the priority items." She said, "And after the 3 weeks," he said, "the firm will compile the full assessment report and provide the restoration recommendations. The recommendations will be substantial. The estate has preservation needs that are significant but addressable." She said, "And you?" He said, "I'll return to the next project." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." He said it, and then, because the 14 evenings had produced the specific quality of two people who had been in the genuine conversations and who were in the quality of the genuine conversations, he said, "I'll miss the estate." She said, "The estate will be here when you want to return." He said, "Yes." He said it with the quality of the incidental and the significant simultaneously. "The estate will be here with the specific weight of the 250 years, and the family records and the archive and the absence of mirrors and the dinner table and the light on her face in the firelight." He finished the 3 weeks. He submitted the assessment documentation. It was the most thorough assessment his firm had produced in its 20-year history. The senior partner called to say this. He said, "The estate merited it." He drove down the estate road in the December light. He thought, "I want to go back." He went back 1 month after the assessment's conclusion. He sent the message to the contact address in the contract documentation. The message that had no professional justification, and that he wrote with the quality of someone who had decided that the accurate communication was the communication rather than the communication that was professionally appropriate. He said, "The assessment is complete and the firm's work is concluded. I am writing to ask if I may visit the estate, not in any professional capacity. I found the estate and the company the most interesting thing in my current world, and I would like to return." The reply came the next day. Thessaly wrote, "Yes, come when you can, we'll be here." He drove the estate road in the January cold. They were at the door. Veen said, "The historical preservation specialist who comes back." He said, "Yes." Thessaly said, "Come in." He came in. The main salon had the fire and the furniture and the quality of the room that had been in the significant occupancy for 250 years, and he sat in the chair he had sat in for 3 weeks of evenings, and they sat across from him. He said, "I want to say something before we continue." They said, "Yes." He said, "The 3 weeks produced the most thorough assessment documentation my firm has produced in 20 years. I produced the thorough documentation because the estate merited it and because the estate's condition and your knowledge of the estate's history have the quality that is not the standard category." He said, "The estate's preservation is extraordinary in the way that exceeds the standard preservation hypothesis. Your knowledge of the estate's history has the quality of primary witness rather than inherited account." He said, "There are no mirrors in the estate." He said, "You don't eat." He said, "The quality of the light on your faces in the firelight is not the quality I produce in any other professional reading." He said, "I want to understand what I've been in the presence of for 3 weeks and what I'm returning to." He said all of this with the quality of someone who had been building toward the saying for a month, and who was saying it in the accurate order rather than the dramatic order. The observations first, the question following. Thessaly said, "Yes." She said it with the quality of someone who had been waiting for the direct question from the direct person for the 3 weeks of the assessment, and for the month following, and who was, in the direct question's arrival, in the specific quality of relief, that was the relief of the thing that was going to be said eventually being said now. She said, "I want to tell you the full account, not the account that manages the information for the recipient. The full account." He said, "Yes, that's what I'm asking for." She said, "Yes." She began. The account was the account of the Voss sisters. The full account, which was the account of 2 women born in the early 18th century in the region that the estate occupied. The account of the estate's construction and the specific circumstances of the estate's construction, and the nature of the Voss family's existence, and the specific event that had preceded the estate's construction by approximately 30 years, and which had produced the nature of the existence that the estate was constructed to contain. He received the account. He received it with the full quality of his attention, the professional quality and the personal quality simultaneously, the quality of the person who read material objects for the information they contained, and who was now reading the account of the material objects makers with the same quality of attention. The account took 2 hours. At the account's end he said, "The family records." Thessaly said, "Yes." He said, "The archive in the West Wing's 2nd floor." She said, "Yes." He said, "The archive is the record of the full duration." She said, 240 years. "Yes," he said, "and the estate's construction." She said, 1762. "The stone is the stone of the region. We selected the quarry personally." He said, "Yes, I read that in the stone. I read the quarry's specific geological signature in the material assessment. The stone had been selected for the specific properties, the density, the composition. The selection was the selection of someone who knew exactly what they needed from the stone." She said, "Yes." He said, "The assessment documentation noted the anomalous preservation quality. I wrote the notation with the professional hedging that the professional documentation requires." She said, "And in your private thinking?" He said, "In my private thinking I knew that the standard preservation hypothesis was insufficient." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." He said, "I have questions." Veen said, "Yes. We expected you would have questions." He said, "The questions are not the questions of someone who is," he found the word, "alarmed. I want to say that before I ask them. The account is significant and I'm in the significant thing's presence and I'm not alarmed." Thessaly said, "No. We didn't expect you would be alarmed." He said, "Why not?" She said, 3 weeks of the evenings and you never asked. The absence of the mirrors, the dinner table, the light on our faces. You read all of it and you held the reading without the alarm response." He said, The alarm response is for the threat. The reading was not reading a threat. She said, no, it wasn't. He said, it was reading something I didn't have the category for. She said, yes, he said, and the account provides the category. She said, yes. He said, yes. He asked the questions. He asked them in the order that the account structure produced them. The historical questions first, because the historical questions were the questions of the professional engagement, and the professional engagement's questions were the ones he had the most practice forming accurately. The personal questions later, because the personal questions required the foundation the historical questions built. The historical questions took the rest of the evening. Hfy answered most of them with the quality of someone who had been in the history the questions were asking about, and who was providing the primary source's account of the primary source's events. The quality was the quality he had been noting since the third day's corridor, the primary witness rather than the inherited account. He said, the historical documentation of the 18th century's estate properties in this region. The records I used in the pre-contract research. Hfy said, yes, he said. The Voss family appears in the regional records from the 1750s. Before 1750 there's no regional record, Hfy said. We arrived in the region in 1751. From the east. The documentation of our existence in the prior location did not follow us, he said. You chose not to bring it, she said. The prior location's documentation was the documentation of people whose existence had become, she found the word complicated. The fresh documentation in a new location was the cleaner approach. He said, yes. That's a preservation specialist's nightmare, but I understand the logic. She said, yes. We regretted the loss of the prior documentation, he said. I imagine you did, she said. The personal records survived. The institutional documentation did not, he said. The personal records are in the West Wing's archive. She said, yes. He said, how far back? She said, the earliest personal records in the archive date to approximately 1690. The estate's archive begins with the estate's construction. He said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I want to ask you something that is not the historical question. Thessaly said, yes. He said, the month. Between the assessment's conclusion and the message. I spent the month with the reading I had done in the 3 weeks, and the account I didn't yet have, and the specific quality of the 3 weeks' evenings. I sent the message because the specific quality of the 3 weeks' evenings was the most significant thing in my current world, and I wanted to be in it again. She said, yes, he said, and now I have the account. She said, yes, he said. The account changes the context of the 3 weeks' evenings. She said, how? He said, the context is larger. The 3 weeks' evenings were the evenings in a mountain estate with 2 unusual occupants. The account's context is the evenings in a mountain estate with 2 people who have been in this estate for 240 years, and who have been in the world for longer than that, and who have been having the evenings in this salon for 240 years. She said, yes, he said, and I want to know if the 3 weeks' evenings were the same evenings for you that they were for me. She said, what kind of evenings were they for you? He said, the most interesting conversations I've had in a considerable time, with 2 people who were asking the genuine questions and receiving the genuine answers, and who were, he found the word, present. Fully present in the conversation in the way that people rarely are. She said, yes. The 3 weeks' evenings were the same evenings for us. He said, yes. She said, yes. He said, then I'm glad I sent the message. She said, we're glad you sent it. Hfy said, we were hoping you would send it. He said, yes. He said, I'll stay the night if the offer stands. Thessaly said, the guest rooms are ready. He said, yes. I thought they might be. She said, we thought you might return. He said, yes. He went to the guest rooms. He lay in the old bed and thought about the account and the archive and the primary records and the 1690 documentation and the estate stone selected personally from the quarry and 240 years of evenings in the main salon. He thought, the most interesting thing in my current world. He thought, yes. The visits continued. He came to the estate on the alternating weekends of the winter months, and then more frequently as the winter gave way to the spring, and the spring made the estate road a different quality from the November wet and the January cold. He came with his documentation equipment, and with the personal equipment of someone who was building the relationship with a place, and with the people who were the place's continuous element across 240 years. He read the archive. Hfy brought him the archive sections in the sequence that the archive's internal organization produced: the family's personal records, the estate's management accounts, the documentation of the estate's relationship with the surrounding region across the centuries. He read with the professional quality and the personal quality simultaneously, and he took notes that were not the professional notes, but the notes of someone building the understanding of the account he had been given. He asked questions. He asked them across the visits, in the evenings, at the fireplace in the main salon, and in the West Wing's second-floor library, when the reading produced the questions, and in the estate's grounds when the spring made the grounds the place where the conversations wanted to be. He asked on the fourth visit, "The world has changed significantly across 240 years. What has the change been like from inside the estate?" Hfy said, "The change has been the change of someone watching from the window. We have been in the estate and the world has changed outside the estate, and we have been in the relationship with the change that the window provides." He said, "The window." She said, "The estate is the continuity. The world outside is the change. We have maintained the continuity and observed the change." He said, "That sounds," he found the word, "lonely." She was quiet. Thessaly said, "Yes, that's an accurate word." He said, "Yes." He said, "And the people in professional capacities. The estate has had professional relationships across 240 years." Thessaly said,